The story begins not with a royal parade, not with the shining jewels of a crown or the flashbulbs of the world's cameras, but in the silent, suffocating tension of a single room. Imagine Prince Harry, the once carefree boy who walked behind his mother's coffin as millions watched, now a man holding an envelope that could dismantle everything he thought he knew about love, about family, and about the very legacy he had built with Meghan Markle. The paper inside is light, barely more than a whisper in his hands, yet it carries a weight heavier than the crown he turned away from. That is where our story begins, with suspicion, with secrecy, and with a truth that no royal press release could ever polish into something palatable. This isn't just about a family crisis. It's about identity, betrayal, and the kind of revelation that leaves scars no palace walls can contain. The world saw their romance as a fairy tale. A prince and an actress, crossing continents and cultures, defying royal protocol to chase love. For a while, it seemed untouchable. They had the glamorous wedding, the adoring crowds, and the narrative of modern progress that the monarchy desperately needed. But behind the carefully orchestrated images of hand-holding strolls and staged interviews lay questions that were quietly ignored or dismissed. Why did Meghan's pregnancies always seem shrouded in mystery? Why did whispers of surrogacy, miscarriages, and private medical battles refuse to fade away, no matter how hard the couple tried to silence them? And most importantly, why did Harry, the man who prided himself on loyalty and transparency, begin to doubt the very foundation of his family life? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The introduction of Archie was supposed to be the cement that bound Harry and Meghan's story forever. But from the moment Meghan first appeared with that carefully cradled bundle, speculation erupted. Some noticed odd details about her baby bump, its changing shape, its seemingly unnatural folds when she bent over. Others claimed insiders had hinted Meghan could not carry a pregnancy to term. For years, these were dismissed as cruel conspiracy theories or jealous attacks. Yet, as time passed, the rumors only grew louder, especially when the couple moved to California and put more physical and emotional distance between themselves and the rest of the royal family. For the public, Archie and Lilibet represented innocence. For Harry, they were supposed to represent hope. But for Meghan, if the darkest allegations are true, they were also symbols of a deception carefully woven to maintain a perfect narrative. We cannot ignore the whispers about Meghan's health. Reports of multiple abortions before her marriage, claims of complications, and finally, the most explosive of all, a hysterectomy that allegedly left her unable to conceive children naturally. These are not details the palace would ever confirm, nor would Meghan herself admit to them publicly, but they form the backbone of suspicions that refuse to die. If Meghan could not have children, how then did she and Harry present Archie and Lilibet as their own? And if not Harry's blood runs through the veins of those children, whose does? These are the questions that tore at the prince's mind in the quiet hours of the night, when the cameras were gone and the walls no longer protected him from his own doubts. The decision to take a DNA test did not come easily. It was not a tabloid headline that pushed Harry to the edge, nor a single argument with Meghan. It was the accumulation of years of inconsistencies, of watching his children and quietly asking himself why their features, their mannerisms, their very essence did not mirror his own. Family members may have fueled the fire. William, perhaps, with his quiet warnings, or Charles with the cold pragmatism of a monarch concerned about the integrity of the line of succession. But ultimately, it was Harry himself, the boy haunted by the loss of Diana, the man desperate for truth in a world built on image, who chose to open Pandora's box. He needed answers, even if they would burn everything down. This introduction sets the stage for an unraveling that feels less like a scandal and more like a tragedy. The DNA test is not just science. It is betrayal in its purest form, a betrayal of trust, of love, of fatherhood. And it is also revelation, because once the results are known, there is no unknowing them. Imagine the moment he unfolded that sheet, saw the words that confirmed his worst fears. Archie and Lilibet were not his biological children. The ground must have fallen beneath him. Every memory, every birthday, every moment he thought was anchored in truth, now transformed into a cruel charade. He was not just a husband deceived. He was a father robbed of his own children, a man trapped in a nightmare with no waking escape. But what makes this story resonate far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace or the sun-soaked estates of Montecito is the universality of its themes. Betrayal, identity, the need for truth. These are not royal problems. They are human problems. Anyone who has ever been lied to by someone they love knows the sting Harry must have felt. Anyone who has ever doubted the story they were told about their family can understand the fear that gnawed at him. And anyone who has ever longed for authenticity in a world full of appearances can sympathize with his desperate quest for clarity. Strip away the crowns, the titles, the millions in wealth, and Harry is just a man confronting the possibility that the most sacred bond in his life, the bond of father to child, was a fabrication. The introduction must also make us question Meghan's motives. Was she truly incapable of telling Harry the truth? Was she protecting him from pain, or protecting herself from losing everything? Did she weave a lie so carefully that even she began to believe it? Or was it cold, calculated survival in a royal system that has no mercy for weakness? The hysterectomy, the abortions, the image of motherhood she clung to. These become not just medical or personal details, but the building blocks of a deception that shaped the course of history. Whether she acted out of fear, ambition, or desperation, the consequences are the same. Two children whose very identities are now questioned, a marriage shattered, and a monarchy reeling from the fallout. As this video unfolds, we will explore not just the shocking revelation of the DNA test, but the ripple effects it unleashed. We will travel back to the early days of Harry and Meghan's courtship, dissect the rumors surrounding Meghan's health, revisit the controversies around Archie and Lilibet's births, and follow Harry's painful journey from doubt to discovery. We will see how the palace reacted, how the media pounced, and how the world divided itself into camps of sympathy and scorn. And finally, we will arrive at the heart of the story, the emotional wreckage left behind when truth obliterates illusion. By the end, you will not only understand the facts, you will feel the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the human cost of a story that might reshape the future of the royal family forever. But for now, as we stand in that room with Harry, staring down at the paper that changed everything, let us ask ourselves the same question he must have asked in that moment. What is worse, the pain of knowing the truth or the agony of living a lie? That is the question that will carry us through this journey, from the first cracks in the fairy tale to the devastating shattering of trust. And as the story unfolds, one thing will become clear. The truth does not set you free, it destroys you first. Not in Montecito, nor in the glittering halls of Windsor, but years earlier when the idea of Meghan Markle as a royal consort was still just a far-off dream. To understand the devastation of Harry's later discoveries, we must first step into the intoxicating fairy tale moment when love seemed enough to conquer centuries of tradition. The introduction of Meghan into Harry's world was not merely the arrival of a partner. It was heralded as a revolution. For the first time, a woman from outside the rigid aristocratic mold had not only captured the heart of a prince, but had been embraced, at least initially, by an institution that prides itself on bloodlines and unbroken tradition. Meghan was American, biracial, divorced, and an actress. Every headline reminded readers of these facts, framing her as the outsider who had breached the most exclusive walls in the world. For Harry, this difference was part of her appeal. He had spent much of his life railing against the constraints of royal duty, and Meghan represented freedom, modernity, and an escape from the suffocating expectations that had defined his existence since childhood. The courtship was whirlwind, the sort of romance that tabloids and gossip magazines devour. Secret meetings, long trips across the Atlantic, Harry sneaking into Toronto to avoid the press, Meghan slipping away from filming her television role to spend time in Kensington Palace apartments. The press painted their romance with broad strokes of glamour and rebellion. Here was a prince who had always been second in line to everything, second son, spare heir, second thought, and suddenly he was first in something that mattered. In Meghan's eyes, he found devotion. In her independence, he found strength. And in her love, he believed he had finally discovered an escape route from the life that had long felt like a prison. But from the very beginning, the relationship was not without its critics. Royal insiders whispered that Meghan's ambition was too sharp, her history too messy, her personality too controlling for life within the monarchy. Friends of Harry, men who had served alongside him in the military, expressed concerns that he was falling too quickly, too blindly. Even William is said to have warned his younger brother with the now infamous phrase, "Slow down." Harry bristled. The warnings only pushed him closer to Meghan, reinforcing his belief that he was doing the right thing by choosing his own path, not the one carved out by the crown. Every resistance from the family only deepened his commitment. Meghan became not just his partner, but his cause. To be with her was to stand against the cold traditions that had once claimed his mother. The wedding in 2018 was the high point, a spectacle watched by millions around the globe. It was more than vows, it was a statement. A gospel choir sang in St. George's Chapel, an American bishop spoke passionately of love and justice, and Meghan walked into history with poise that left the world in awe. In that moment, it seemed as though the monarchy had taken a giant leap forward, embracing diversity and change. Harry was radiant, convinced that he had finally rewritten the script of his life. For the public, it was the fairy tale realized, a prince who chose love above all else. Yet beneath the pomp and pageantry, seeds of future turmoil were already being sown. Marriage brought new pressures, and the arrival of children became the subject of intense speculation almost immediately. The world wanted to see an heir, to watch the continuation of a royal bloodline. For Meghan, the expectation was suffocating. Her every gesture, every outfit, every slip of her hand across her stomach was dissected by the press for signs of pregnancy. Within months, Kensington Palace announced that Meghan and Harry were expecting. The headlines were jubilant. But almost immediately, skeptics began whispering that something was off. Photos of Meghan's growing bump seemed inconsistent. The way it folded when she bent down, the speed of its growth, the angles of the pictures, it all became fodder for speculation. At first, Harry dismissed it as cruel tabloid chatter, no different from the endless insults that had followed his mother. But as time passed, the whispers refused to die down. For some, it was evidence that Meghan might not have been carrying the child herself. For Harry, it was noise he refused to acknowledge. The birth of Archie should have silenced those whispers. Yet even that moment carried an air of secrecy. The announcement came late, the details vague, and Meghan's sudden appearance with the baby seemed more staged than organic. The palace broke with tradition by not presenting the child immediately on the hospital steps, as William and Kate had done with their children. Instead, Meghan and Harry controlled the narrative, carefully orchestrating how and when Archie was shown to the world. To many, this was understandable, a couple trying to protect their privacy. To others, it was yet another sign that something was being hidden. For Harry, the joy of fatherhood outweighed the questions. He gazed at the infant in his arms and believed he had finally built the family he had always longed for. But the fairy tale was fragile. The relentless press, the cold reception from certain royals, and the weight of expectation all pressed down on the marriage. Meghan, who had entered the royal fold with such optimism, began to struggle visibly. Interviews hinted at her unhappiness. Her body language grew tense, her words defensive. Rumors of miscarriages and medical complications began to surface. Some claimed Meghan had confided in close friends about struggles with fertility long before Archie's birth. Others suggested procedures had left her unable to conceive again. Harry, fiercely protective, fought to shield her from the storm. Yet privately, doubts began to take root. The arrival of Lilibet should have been a moment of healing, a fresh start far from the palace walls in their California sanctuary. Yet once again, the circumstances of her birth ignited controversy. There were no public hospital photos, no official announcements beyond carefully crafted press releases. The secrecy only inflamed the skeptics, who pointed to long-circulating rumors that Meghan had undergone a hysterectomy years earlier. If that were true, how could she have given birth to 2 children in such quick succession? The question gnawed at Harry, though he buried it beneath devotion and loyalty. To question Meghan would be to unravel his entire life, and so he pressed on, smiling for the cameras, defending her at every turn. This first chapter is crucial because it sets the foundation for everything that follows. To understand the devastation of the DNA test, we must first understand the intoxicating hope that defined Harry and Meghan's beginning. They were the couple who promised to rewrite history, who held hands against tradition and believed love could conquer centuries of rigidity. They were celebrated as symbols of change, of modernity, of courage. But that promise, that fairy tale sheen, was fragile from the start. Every romance has its shadows, but few are burdened with the weight of monarchy, global scrutiny, and whispered secrets about life and death, birth and blood. Theirs was not just a marriage of two people, but a collision of worlds, and within that collision lay cracks invisible at first glance, but destined to grow into chasms. As we leave this chapter, we are left with a simple but haunting truth. The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. Meghan and Harry built their love story in the brightest spotlight, but behind the scenes, questions of authenticity, fertility, and trust were already fermenting. These early days, filled with glamour and defiance, would later be remembered not for their joy, but for the irony of how carefully they hid the very cracks that would one day shatter everything. Where the wedding glow starts to fade and reality creeps in. The fairy tale beginning had captivated the world, but as the applause softened, the cracks began to show. Life inside the royal bubble was never going to be simple for Meghan Markle, and the more she tried to mold herself into the institution, the more obvious it became that the fit was never natural. For Harry, the transition from the rebellious prince to husband and father brought pressures he had underestimated. It was in this period, as the couple settled into married life, that the first cracks in the crown began to appear, and with them, the seeds of doubt about their family, their story, and their future. The early months of marriage should have been blissful, but instead, they were a constant tug-of-war between Meghan's desire to live as a modern woman and the monarchy's demands for silence, decorum, and conformity. Meghan found herself scrutinized for everything: her clothes, her gestures, her comments to staff. When she spoke passionately, she was branded as difficult. When she stayed quiet, she was accused of being cold or manipulative. Harry, so accustomed to the machinery of the press, began to see how differently Meghan experienced it. To him, criticism was the background noise of royal life. To her, it was an avalanche. It strained their marriage, but Harry clung to his role as protector. He remembered vividly what had happened to his mother when the institution abandoned her, and he swore history would not repeat itself. He shielded Meghan fiercely, but in doing so, he began to distance himself from his family, choosing his wife over the crown again and again. This is when the whispers about Meghan's health started to move from the margins of tabloid gossip into conversations behind palace doors. Reports of past miscarriages began to surface, whispered by sources who claimed to have known Meghan before Harry. Others said Meghan confided in a few trusted friends about procedures she had undergone in her younger years, procedures that allegedly made carrying a pregnancy to term extremely difficult, if not impossible. Such whispers would have meant little if not for the strange details surrounding her pregnancy with Archie. Meghan's baby bump appeared inconsistent in size and shape from week to week. On some days it appeared too large for the stage of pregnancy she claimed to be in, on others it seemed almost to vanish. Photographs circulated online showing the bump folding unnaturally when she bent to pick something up, fueling speculation that a prosthetic might have been used. The palace offered no explanation, choosing instead to double down on controlling access, limiting photographs, and staging appearances under carefully managed conditions. For Harry, these rumors were insulting and cruel. He saw them as extensions of the racist undertones that had plagued Meghan from the beginning. The British tabloids, in his eyes, were determined to destroy her just as they had destroyed Diana. He reacted with anger and lawsuits, trying to silence any publication that dared to question their family narrative. Yet behind closed doors, the strain of defending Meghan against endless speculation took its toll. He began to isolate further from William and Kate, who had always represented a safe harbor. Conversations with his brother grew terse. William allegedly questioned why so many details around Archie's birth were shrouded in secrecy, pointing out that every other royal had followed tradition. Harry bristled. He refused to let anyone question Meghan. The more the family pressed, the more he withdrew. When Archie was born, rather than calm the storm, the secrecy around his arrival fanned the flames. Meghan did not give birth in the same manner as Kate, paraded on the hospital steps with smiling photos hours after labor. Instead, announcements were delayed, details were vague, and photographs emerged only when Meghan and Harry decided the timing was right. To the public, it seemed like a rejection of royal transparency. To Harry, it was simply protecting his wife and son. But for critics and skeptics, it was confirmation that something was amiss. Why hide the details unless there was something to hide? That question began to shape every story that followed. The strain grew heavier with the announcement of their second child, Lilibet. By this time, the couple had left the United Kingdom, trading palace walls for California sunshine. They were no longer working royals, no longer tethered to royal duties. Yet the secrecy intensified. Again, no hospital photos, no clear details, only carefully scripted announcements. Rumors about Meghan's ability to carry a child resurfaced, this time louder than ever. Some alleged that she had undergone a hysterectomy years earlier, perhaps following complications from earlier procedures or miscarriages. If true, that would have made natural pregnancy impossible. For Harry, these whispers were daggers. On one hand, he dismissed them publicly, raging against the press and accusing them of cruelty. On the other, in the privacy of his mind, doubts began to stir. He had seen enough inconsistencies, enough carefully controlled details, to begin to wonder if he himself had been shielded from truths he deserved to know. The tension inside the marriage deepened. Meghan, already struggling under the weight of public scorn, became increasingly defensive. She insisted on controlling the narrative, managing every detail of their story, from interviews to photographs to the way their children were spoken of in public. Harry complied because to resist would mean betraying her, but the cost was growing isolation. Friends from his old life faded away. Family bonds frayed. And in the silence of their California estate, Harry began to wrestle with questions he dared not voice. Could it be possible that the rumors held some truth? Could it be that Meghan had withheld information about her health, her fertility, and the origins of their children? He wanted to dismiss it outright, but the more he tried, the harder it became. The cracks in the crown were no longer just about Meghan versus the monarchy, or Sussexes versus the tabloids. They were about the very foundation of Harry's family life. He had always prided himself on honesty, on loyalty, on authenticity. Now, he was beginning to fear that his own home might not be built on the same values. The public saw smiles, but behind closed doors, Harry was confronting inconsistencies he could no longer ignore. The man who once thought love alone could shield him from the storms of tradition was beginning to realize that storms have a way of finding you, no matter how far you run. By the end of this chapter, the audience sees clearly that the fairy tale has shifted into something darker. Meghan and Harry's marriage is under pressure not only from the press and the palace, but from within. The secrecy around pregnancies and births, the whispers of medical complications, and the growing distance between Harry and his family all create a backdrop of tension that cannot hold forever. This is not yet the breaking point, but it is the beginning of the unraveling. For Harry, loyalty is still stronger than doubt, but the seeds have been planted. Seeds that will one day grow into the devastating moment when he opens that DNA envelope and confronts the truth he tried so hard to avoid. With the kind of whispers no family ever wants to confront, the kind that move in hushed tones behind closed doors and grow louder until they can no longer be ignored. By this point, Meghan and Harry were no longer just a newlywed couple trying to find their rhythm. They were global figures, their lives broadcast on a stage bigger than any Hollywood set or royal balcony. But away from the flashing cameras and smiling photographs, Meghan's medical history was becoming a subject of obsession. Allegations swirled that before her marriage, Meghan had undergone several abortions, that complications had followed, and that a hysterectomy had eventually made natural conception impossible. Whether whispered in the corridors of Buckingham Palace or murmured by former friends back in Los Angeles, these claims carried a devastating implication. If true, then the entire narrative of Meghan and Harry as doting parents was built on deception. For Harry, who had already spent years defending his wife against criticism, the allegations cut deeper than the usual gossip. Abortions, miscarriages, infertility, these were not just tabloid talking points. They were wounds that could scar a person forever. If Meghan had endured them, then it would explain her fierce determination to control the narrative, her obsession with protecting her privacy, and her relentless fight against the press. But if the whispers about a hysterectomy were true, then the very heart of their family story, Archie and Lilibet, would come under question. Harry found himself caught between compassion and suspicion. On one hand, he wanted to shield Meghan from cruel speculation. On the other, the doubts gnawed at him with increasing ferocity. What if he was raising children who were not his? What if he had been lied to from the very beginning? The abortion rumors were not new. Years before she met Harry, Meghan had allegedly confided in acquaintances about a pregnancy that ended abruptly. Some claimed it was voluntary, others suggested complications. Then came whispers of multiple such incidents, each leaving scars that went far beyond the physical. By the time she married Harry, insiders claimed she had already undergone procedures that would make carrying a child nearly impossible. Those who believe these accounts point to her age, her health struggles, and the carefully managed secrecy around her pregnancies as supporting evidence. Meghan, for her part, has never confirmed or denied such stories. She has spoken in vague terms about loss and struggle, enough to elicit sympathy, but never enough to silence the skeptics. The hysterectomy claims are the most explosive of all. A hysterectomy, the surgical removal of the uterus, would mean Meghan could never naturally conceive or carry a child. According to some sources, she underwent the procedure following complications from prior medical issues, possibly related to the alleged abortions. If that were true, then Archie and Lilibet could not have been born as Meghan presented them to the world. Instead, their existence would point to surrogacy or other arrangements Harry may not have been fully aware of at the time. This possibility shook him to his core. It was not just about whether Meghan had told him the truth. It was about whether he had been made complicit in presenting a public lie. The world saw Archie's debut as a moment of joy. But to those who questioned Meghan's medical history, it was a performance. The folding bump, the vague birth details, the absence of hospital tradition, all of it became evidence. When Lilibet was born under similarly secretive circumstances, the whispers only intensified. By then, Meghan and Harry were in California, far from the scrutiny of royal doctors and palace staff. They could manage every detail, control every photograph, craft every narrative. But secrecy has a way of backfiring. Instead of silencing the skeptics, it only emboldened them. The more Meghan withheld, the more the world speculated. For Harry, it was suffocating. He was forced to defend a story he was no longer entirely sure he believed. The emotional toll on the marriage was immense. Harry, once unwaveringly confident in Meghan's every word, began to feel the pull of doubt. Arguments erupted behind closed doors. He asked questions Meghan deflected. He pressed for details she dismissed. She accused him of betraying her by even entertaining the rumors. He accused her of withholding truths that could destroy him. The tension between them grew like a fracture line running through glass, at first invisible, but under pressure, certain to shatter. Meghan doubled down on her defenses, insisting the world was out to destroy her, just as it had destroyed Diana. She played on Harry's greatest fear, that he would lose his wife to the same forces that had taken his mother. And for a time, that fear silenced his doubts. He stood by her side, defended her publicly, and continued to shut out anyone who dared to question their narrative. But doubt, once planted, does not die easily. Harry could not unsee the inconsistencies, could not unhear the whispers. The hysterectomy claims followed him everywhere. In private moments, when he looked at his children, he wondered, were they truly his flesh and blood, or were they symbols of a deception he could not yet face? The thought tormented him. He loved Archie and Lilibet deeply, but love does not silence truth. If Meghan had hidden something so monumental, what else had she concealed? Was their marriage built on genuine devotion, or on manipulation designed to secure her place in history? These questions grew louder with each passing day. The palace, too, could not ignore the rumors. William allegedly pressed Harry more than once, suggesting that the secrecy around Meghan's pregnancies did more harm than good. Charles, ever pragmatic, raised quiet concerns about succession and legitimacy. Even Diana's old allies expressed worry that Harry was being drawn into something he could not control. Each confrontation pushed Harry further into a corner. To defend Meghan was to isolate himself. To question her was to risk losing everything. For a man who had already lost his mother, the choice felt impossible. And yet, the truth has a way of demanding to be faced. The abortion allegations, the hysterectomy claims, the mounting inconsistencies, together, they became too heavy for Harry to ignore. This chapter ends with him standing at a crossroads. On one side, loyalty to Meghan, the woman he loved and had defended against the world. On the other, a gnawing need for truth, for certainty, for clarity about his children and his marriage. The man who once believed love alone could shield him was beginning to realize that love, without truth, becomes a prison. The whispers had grown into a roar, and no amount of silence could drown them out. The decision to seek answers, the decision that would ultimately lead to the DNA test, was not yet made, but the path toward it had already begun. In the world of carefully staged images and scripted words, the realm where Meghan and Harry became experts at curating what the public saw. After the allegations of abortions and the whispered claims of a hysterectomy, the couple leaned heavily on what could be controlled: their public image. If cracks existed in their private life, if Harry's doubts about the children or Meghan's secrecy gnawed at their marriage, none of it was allowed to seep through the polished lens of Archewell, the organization they built to serve as both a charitable arm and a narrative shield. Archewell was not just a foundation. It was a fortress designed to project a flawless version of Harry and Meghan's life as parents, leaders, and visionaries, while keeping hidden any inconvenient truths. When they stepped away from royal duties, the world expected them to fade into quiet civilian life. Instead, they built an empire of storytelling. Netflix deals, podcasts, carefully managed interviews with Oprah and others, each moment calculated to reinforce the image of Harry and Meghan as the wronged but resilient couple. Archewell became their vehicle for rewriting the narrative. Every video clip, every press release, every glossy photo seemed to scream authenticity and vulnerability. Meghan spoke of her struggles as a mother, her pain in being misunderstood, her trauma under the glare of the British press. Harry spoke of generational wounds, his desire to break free from the cycle that had consumed his mother. Together, they painted a picture of love and family that resonated deeply with their supporters. Yet beneath the surface, the foundation served another purpose: to conceal the parts of their story that could not withstand scrutiny. The children were at the heart of Archewell's image machine. Archie and Lilibet were symbols, presented not just as Harry and Meghan's pride and joy, but as emblems of a new, modern family, unshackled from royal constraints. But here is where the secrecy became striking. Unlike William and Kate, who shared glimpses of their children at milestones, Harry and Meghan chose to tightly control when and how their children were seen. No candid photographs, no hospital appearances, no public family outings. Instead, images emerged selectively: a photograph of Archie's foot in black and white, a carefully staged Christmas card, an artistic shot of Meghan cradling her bump in a field. Each image was crafted to appear intimate and authentic, yet its very perfection raised questions. Why were the children hidden so much? Why did every glimpse feel more like a marketing campaign than a family moment? This control extended to their interviews. When Oprah asked Meghan about her pregnancies and her role as a mother, Meghan spoke in broad strokes about trauma, resilience, and love. She presented herself as a woman who had survived attacks from the press and cruelty from the institution. But she avoided details. The interview raised sympathy but offered little clarity. Similarly, when Harry spoke about being a father, his words carried emotion but lacked the kind of personal anecdotes that would ground them in reality. Supporters praised their vulnerability. Critics saw evasion. And through it all, the suspicions about Meghan's ability to carry children and Harry's connection to them only grew. The Archewell brand relied on consistency. They positioned themselves as the champions of truth, yet the contradictions in their own story became impossible to ignore. Meghan launched projects focused on women's health and empowerment, yet refused to address the swirling rumors about her own medical history. Harry campaigned for transparency and honesty in media, yet avoided confronting the most personal truth of all. This hypocrisy began to eat away at their credibility. To many, it appeared that Archewell was less about charity and more about damage control, a carefully constructed shield against questions they could not afford to answer. Behind the scenes, Harry was wrestling with doubts that threatened to break him. Archwell's glossy image could not silence the private questions he carried. Each carefully staged photograph of Archie and Lilibet only deepened his unease. Were these truly his children? Was he complicit in presenting them to the world as his own when he was no longer sure of the truth? The DNA test had not yet been taken, but the storm clouds were gathering. Every public appearance with Meghan required him to smile, to nod, to stand by her side as if nothing was wrong. But behind closed doors, his loyalty wavered. He loved his children fiercely, but doubt is corrosive, and each new photo release, each staged interview, reminded him of the deception he feared. The palace, watching from afar, saw Archwell as a threat. William and Charles recognized the strategy for what it was, a narrative war. Meghan and Harry were using modern media to outmaneuver the monarchy, crafting a version of events that left the crown looking cold and unfeeling. The Oprah interview, in particular, sent shockwaves through the royal family. Accusations of racism, cruelty, and neglect damaged the institution's reputation globally. Yet, even in the midst of that storm, private concerns about Meghan's health and the children's legitimacy persisted. Within palace walls, questions about succession and bloodlines were whispered with increasing urgency. Could the monarchy ignore the rumors forever? Could Harry's children, if proven not to be biologically his, ever be considered legitimate heirs? For Meghan, the Archwell image machine was survival. She knew the power of narrative better than anyone, having spent years as an actress. Archwell was her stage, and she was the star. She understood that control of the story meant control of power. By shaping how the world saw her and Harry, she could drown out the whispers, silence the skeptics, and maintain the illusion of a perfect family. But this level of control came at a price. It isolated Harry further from his roots, cutting him off from family, friends, and even the possibility of confronting the truth. Archwell did not just protect Meghan. It imprisoned Harry in a narrative he was beginning to question. As this chapter closes, the contrast between appearance and reality has never been sharper. Publicly, Meghan and Harry are the image of resilience. A couple who escaped the rigidity of the monarchy to build a life of love and service. Privately, Harry is drowning in suspicion, his doubts about Meghan's medical history and the children's paternity growing louder each day. Archwell, the fortress they built to protect their story, has become both shield and cage. For Harry, the image machine that once felt like liberation now feels like suffocation. The fairy tale is cracking, and the foundation of deception is starting to show. Soon, the need for truth will overwhelm the power of image, and when that happens, no brand, no foundation, and no narrative will be strong enough to contain the fallout. With the image of a man quietly unraveling in private while smiling in public. By now, Harry had defended Meghan against relentless criticism, endured the cold distance from his brother, and isolated himself from the only family that had known him since birth. He had sacrificed the royal institution for her, given up duties and privileges, and moved halfway across the world to build a new life. On the surface, the California sun was supposed to symbolize freedom, but inside Harry's mind the clouds never dispersed. What had once been whispers of doubt had grown into a chorus he could no longer silence. Subtle inconsistencies in Meghan's stories, medical details that never added up, and the growing secrecy around Archie and Lilibet's lives fed a gnawing unease that no amount of staged photographs or heartfelt speeches could extinguish. This was the chapter where Harry's growing doubts became the central force in his life. It often started with small observations. A detail Meghan mentioned one evening that contradicted something she had said before. A timeline that seemed impossible when Harry thought about it later. An offhand remark from a doctor or aide that didn't align with the official story. Each by itself could be dismissed, but together they began to form a pattern that Harry could not ignore. For years he had trusted Meghan implicitly, blinded by love and loyalty. But love, when tested by suspicion, becomes fragile. He began to notice things he once overlooked. Why had Meghan been so secretive about her medical appointments? Why did she insist on controlling the narrative of the children's births so tightly? Why did her explanations about her health change depending on the audience? The doubts followed him into every aspect of his life. When he watched Archie laugh, he wondered if he saw his own reflection in the boy's face. When he held Lilibet, he studied her features, searching for traces of Diana or of himself. Sometimes he thought he saw them, and relief washed over him. Other times he was not so sure, and fear returned. These were thoughts he could not voice aloud, not even to Meghan. To ask would be to betray her, to open wounds he feared would never heal. So he carried the questions alone, and the weight grew heavier every day. The pressure mounted in his interactions with Meghan. Their marriage, once a partnership forged in rebellion, was now laced with tension. Meghan grew more defensive, more controlling, as Harry's silences became longer and his eyes more searching. She sensed his doubt, and it frightened her. To her, every question felt like an accusation. Every hesitation from him felt like disloyalty. Their arguments became sharper, their reconciliations shorter. Meghan reminded him of the cruelty she endured from the press, insisting that to doubt her was to side with her enemies. Harry reminded her of his need for honesty, of the trauma of being lied to in the past. Neither could fully bridge the gap. The bond that had once seemed unbreakable was fraying thread by thread. Outside their home, the world still adored the fairy tale. Meghan and Harry appeared on stages, in interviews, and on magazine covers as the picture of unity. But those moments felt increasingly hollow to Harry. The applause did not quiet his doubts. Instead, it amplified the distance between the image they projected and the reality he lived. He wondered how long they could keep up the performance before the truth tore it all apart. Every time he defended Meghan in public, every time he smiled for cameras, he felt like he was complicit in a lie he hadn't yet confirmed but already feared. The strain seeped into his relationship with the rest of the royal family. William's warnings, once dismissed as overprotective, now echoed in Harry's mind. Charles's quiet concerns about the legitimacy of the bloodline returned with fresh urgency. Even his memories of Diana weighed heavily. What would she think of the choices he had made? Would she have wanted him to stand by Meghan no matter the cost? Or would she have urged him to face the truth? Harry often found himself alone, staring at old photographs of his mother, searching for answers in her eyes that would never come. The loneliness of that search only deepened his doubts. As Harry's unease grew, so too did the pressure from outside forces. Journalists continued to speculate about Meghan's medical history. Former friends of hers whispered to tabloids about past abortions and possible procedures. Online forums dissected every photograph of the children, comparing their features to Harry's with ruthless precision. For a man already haunted by doubt, the relentless speculation felt like an echo chamber. He could no longer dismiss it all as baseless gossip. Too many pieces seemed to fit together. Too many questions had no answers. The breaking point came not in a moment of confrontation, but in the quiet of everyday life. Harry remembered a conversation with Meghan about her pregnancies, one she had brushed off with vague reassurances. He thought back to the day Archie was born, how the palace announcements had been delayed, how no one seemed to know the full details. He recalled the birth of Lilibet, managed entirely from California, away from the scrutiny of royal doctors. The pattern was undeniable: secrecy, control, and contradictions. Harry realized he could no longer live with doubt. He needed certainty, no matter the cost. This chapter marks the turning of the tide. Where once Harry had been blinded by loyalty, he was now driven by suspicion. He still loved Meghan, still adored his children, but the foundation of his trust had eroded. The doubts he once pushed away now dominated his thoughts. He began to consider what he had once thought unthinkable, seeking answers outside of Meghan's control. The possibility of a DNA test lingered at the edge of his mind, terrifying yet inevitable. He knew that to pursue it would risk everything: their marriage, their family, their carefully constructed image. But he also knew that to ignore it would destroy him from the inside out. The man who once believed love could conquer all was beginning to understand that love without truth is a cage. And he was ready, at last, to break free. As this chapter ends, Harry stands on the precipice of discovery. His doubts, once whispers, are now screams he cannot silence. The world still sees the fairy tale, but Harry knows the truth is close, waiting to be uncovered. He is torn between loyalty and honesty, between protecting Meghan and protecting himself. The DNA test is not yet in his hands, but its shadow looms over every decision he makes. The seeds of betrayal have taken root, and soon, the storm they unleash will consume everything he thought he knew about love, fatherhood, and family. With the echoes of voices Harry could not ignore. By this point, his doubts were no longer confined to his own mind. They were being fed by conversations with family members, advisors, and even old friends who saw the cracks he was trying desperately to hide. Family confrontations had always been a part of royal life. Disagreements were common, tempers flared behind closed doors, and resentments lingered beneath smiles on the balcony. But this was different. This was not about duties or protocol. This was about Harry's very identity as a father and husband, and the people who loved him most were no longer willing to stay silent. William was the first to speak plainly. Their relationship had been strained since the beginning of Harry's marriage, but the bond of brotherhood still lingered. William had tried to warn Harry before he married Meghan, urging him to take more time, to think carefully about what he was doing. Harry had ignored that advice, seeing it as meddling, as yet another example of William playing the responsible heir while treating him as the reckless spare. But years later, with rumors swirling and Harry visibly unraveling, William revisited the subject. He asked Harry directly why there were so many inconsistencies around Meghan's pregnancies. Why were the details so tightly controlled? Why had Harry cut himself off from people who only wanted the best for him? Harry, defensive as always, bristled at the questions. Yet even in his anger, he knew William's words carried weight. They came from a place of concern, not cruelty. Charles's interventions were less emotional, but more pointed. As king, he understood the stakes in ways Harry did not want to confront. The monarchy thrived on legitimacy, on the certainty of bloodlines. Every heir, every child mattered to the institution. If there was doubt about Archie and Lilibet's parentage, then the very foundation of the line of succession could be questioned. For Charles, this was not just about family. It was about survival of the crown. He reminded Harry of his responsibility, not just as a father, but as a prince of the realm. If the rumors persisted, if the truth was ever exposed, the monarchy would face a scandal unlike any in its history. Harry felt cornered by his father's words. To him, they sounded less like concern for his well-being and more like cold calculation. But beneath that calculation lay a truth Harry could not deny. The monarchy had weathered many storms, but this one could sink it. Other voices joined in. Old friends from Harry's military days reached out, some quietly, others bluntly. They had seen his loyalty, his devotion to Meghan, but they also saw the toll it was taking. They asked him if he was sure, if he was certain about the story he was defending so fiercely. A few even hinted that they had heard stories from Meghan's past, whispers about medical complications and procedures she had never spoken of publicly. Harry wanted to shut them out, to dismiss them as gossip. But these were men who had stood by him in battle, men he trusted with his life. Their words carried a weight he could not easily brush aside. Even Diana's old allies, those who had once protected him as a child, found ways to voice their concern. Some of them saw in Meghan's story echoes of the manipulation Diana had suffered, the ways the institution had used her for image while ignoring her pain. Others worried that Harry was blind to a different kind of manipulation, one that came not from the crown, but from within his own home. Their warnings were gentle but persistent. Do not lose yourself in someone else's narrative. Harry, who had built his identity around defending Meghan against perceived enemies, struggled to hear these words. But the seed had been planted. Was he defending Meghan out of love, or out of fear of losing her? The confrontations grew more direct as time passed. William reportedly confronted Meghan herself on one occasion, questioning her about the secrecy surrounding the children. The exchange was tense, almost explosive. Meghan accused him of jealousy and cruelty, of perpetuating the same coldness that had destroyed Harry's childhood. William countered that his only concern was his brother's well-being and the integrity of the family. Harry, caught in the middle, sided with Meghan in the moment, but carried William's words with him long after. Every confrontation left him more conflicted, torn between the woman he loved and the family he had abandoned to protect her. The palace advisors, ever pragmatic, added their own voices to the mix. They reminded Harry of the potential legal and political fallout if the rumors proved true. Questions of inheritance, titles, and financial entitlements loomed. If Archie and Lilibet were not his biological children, the repercussions could be staggering. Harry, who had always hated the transactional nature of royal life, found himself forced to consider the cold reality. The monarchy was not just a family. It was an institution with centuries of history and billions at stake. His private doubts were becoming a public risk, and the people around him knew it. These confrontations chipped away at Harry's defenses. He had spent years convincing himself that the world was against Meghan, that his duty was to shield her at all costs. But the people confronting him were not enemies. They were his father, his brother, his friends, the people who had known him before Meghan entered his life. Their concern was genuine, even if it was wrapped in anger or calculation. And the more they pressed, the harder it became for Harry to ignore the possibility that they were right. Perhaps he had been too quick to trust. Perhaps love had blinded him. Perhaps the story he was defending was not the truth at all. By the end of this chapter, Harry is no longer just a man with private doubts. He is a man under siege from every side. The people closest to him are demanding answers. The institution he abandoned is pressuring him to confront the truth. The marriage he fought so hard to protect is showing cracks that no amount of public image can conceal. He stands at a crossroads, with loyalty pulling him one way and truth pulling him another. The confrontations have left him shaken, uncertain, and increasingly desperate. The decision to seek clarity, to take the DNA test, is now inevitable. It is no longer just about his peace of mind. It is about his family, his legacy, and the future of the monarchy itself. This chapter closes with Harry staring at the people who know him best, realizing that their words, however painful, might be the only mirror he has left. He can no longer dismiss them as meddling or malicious. They have forced him to confront the one truth he has been running from. If he does not seek answers, he will lose himself completely. The DNA test is not yet taken, but the path is clear. The next step will shatter everything, but to remain in doubt would destroy him anyway. The storm is gathering, and Harry is finally ready to face it. Chapter 7 begins in the stillness of a late night, the kind of hour when thoughts are loudest and defenses weakest. Harry sat alone, the California sky heavy with silence, his mind circling the same question again and again. How much longer could he live with doubt? The family confrontations, the whispers of old friends, the inconsistencies that had piled up over the years. All of it now converged on one unavoidable conclusion. He needed proof. Not assumptions, not reassurances, not Meghan's carefully chosen words. Proof. The decision to take a DNA test was not made in a single moment, but born from years of tension, shame, and unspoken fears. Yet when it finally crystallized in Harry's mind, it was like a dam breaking. For the first time, he admitted to himself that love alone was no longer enough. Truth, no matter how brutal, had to come first. The thought of seeking a DNA test terrified him. On one side lay confirmation that would tear his life apart. On the other lay relief, the possibility that his fears were unfounded, that he could once again hold his children without the shadow of doubt. But even that outcome came with a cost. If the test proved the children were his, the very act of questioning them would still linger, poisoning his bond with Meghan forever. If the test proved otherwise, everything he had built, his marriage, his role as a father, his carefully crafted public image, would collapse in an instant. It was the kind of choice that has no winners, only losses in different forms. Harry's first instinct was secrecy. He could not share this decision with Meghan, not after years of arguments where any mention of doubt had turned into accusations of betrayal. He could not tell his father or brother, who would see it as validation of their warnings. Nor could he confide in friends, knowing that one slip could turn his private agony into a global scandal overnight. The test had to be his alone, a private pursuit of truth in a life where privacy had always been stolen from him. He reached out quietly, using contacts far removed from the royal machine, people he trusted from his military days who understood discretion. He needed a laboratory with credibility, but also confidentiality. He needed results that could not be dismissed as rumor, yet could not be leaked to the tabloids before he was ready to face them. The process itself was deceptively simple. A swab, a sample of saliva, carefully sealed and sent away. Yet in that moment, it felt monumental, as though he were signing away the story of his life. Every motion carried the weight of betrayal, not of Meghan, but of himself. For years, he had prided himself on loyalty, on standing by her no matter the cost. Now, with one simple act, He was acknowledging that he no longer fully believed her. It was not just a test of biology. It was a test of trust, of faith, of marriage. When the package left his hands, Harry felt as though a piece of his soul had gone with it. The days that followed were agony. Waiting for results meant living in limbo, torn between two futures, each unbearable in its own way. Harry went about his routines, playing with Archie, holding Lilibet, smiling for photographs, but inside he was unraveling. Every laugh, every cry from his children carried an edge of sorrow. He studied them more closely than ever before, searching their faces for confirmation one way or another. Did Archie's smile echo his own? Did Lilibet's eyes carry a trace of Diana? Sometimes he thought yes, and his heart swelled with relief. Other times he thought no, and fear consumed him all over again. The waiting hollowed him out, stretching each day into an eternity. Meghan sensed his distance, but Harry could not bring himself to explain. Their conversations grew clipped, their arguments sharper. She accused him of being distracted, of not supporting her fully in the face of continued media attacks. He deflected, offering vague reassurances while hiding the storm raging inside him. At night, when she slept, he lay awake, staring into the darkness, imagining the envelope that would soon arrive. He wondered how it would feel to open it, whether relief or devastation would wash over him. More than once, he wished he could turn back, undo the decision. But the test was already in motion, and there was no escape. The truth was coming, whether he wanted it or not. In those days of waiting, Harry found himself reflecting on his life with Meghan. He replayed their early romance, the laughter, the passion, the feeling of being understood for the first time. He remembered the wedding, the vows they made, the pride in calling her his wife. He remembered the births of Archie and Lilibet, the joy he felt when he first held them, even amid the secrecy and the whispers. These memories clashed violently with the doubts he now carried. Was it all real? Or had he been a character in a story someone else had written? The thought that his entire family life could be a fabrication was almost too much to bear. The choice to pursue the test was not only about him. It was also about the children. Harry could not escape the thought that one day, Archie and Lilibet would grow up, that they would ask questions, that they would want to know their truth. If he turned away now, if he chose not to know, he would be complicit in a deception that would hurt them more than it hurt him. To be a father, he realized, meant not only love but honesty. He could not demand integrity from them one day if he did not first confront it himself. In this way, the test became less about betrayal and more about responsibility. Whatever the results, he owed them the truth. As the days crawled by, the envelope finally arrived. Harry stared at it for hours before finding the courage to touch it. There it lay, thin and unassuming, yet heavy with the weight of destiny. He thought of every conversation with William, every warning from Charles, every whisper from friends and strangers alike. He thought of Meghan's reassurances, her anger when questioned, her insistence that the world was against her. He thought of his children, their laughter, their innocence. And then he thought of himself, a man who had given up everything for love, only to find himself standing on the edge of an abyss. The decision was made the moment he reached for the envelope. The truth was here, and he could no longer run from it. This chapter ends not with revelation, but with anticipation. The DNA results remain sealed, their contents unknown, but the act of pursuing them has already changed everything. Harry is no longer the man blinded by loyalty, no longer the husband silenced by love. He is a man demanding truth, prepared to face whatever pain it brings. The moment of reckoning is near, and the next chapter will reveal the answer that will shatter or save his life. For now, all we see is Harry, alone with the envelope, the silence of the room pressing in, the weight of the world in his hands. Chapter 8 begins with the slow, deliberate movements of a man on the brink of unraveling. Harry sat in the quiet of his California home, the walls echoing with the laughter of his children somewhere in the distance, the kind of sound that should bring comfort, but instead twisted like a knife in his chest. On the table before him lay the envelope, thin yet unbearably heavy, the culmination of every doubt, every whispered rumor, every confrontation he had endured. The DNA test results had arrived. This was the moment he had both dreaded and longed for, the moment where suspicion would either dissolve into relief or harden into devastating truth. There was no going back. Once opened, the life he had built with Meghan and the identity he held as a father could never again be the same. He stared at the envelope for hours, afraid to touch it, terrified of what it might say. His hands trembled when he finally picked it up. He thought of his mother, Diana, and how she had always urged him to follow his heart, to trust and love. He thought of William, whose warnings had been dismissed as jealousy, but now echoed like prophecy. He thought of Meghan, whose reassurances had soothed him for years, but whose contradictions had pushed him to this moment. Most of all, he thought of Archie and Lilibet, the two innocent lives whose existence hung in the balance of a sheet of paper. Whatever the envelope contained, it was not just about him. It was about them, their identities, their futures, their place in a world that would never stop scrutinizing them. When he finally tore it open, the sound seemed deafening in the silence. His eyes scanned the page, heart pounding in his chest. For a brief moment, he couldn't make sense of the words, as though his mind refused to process what was in front of him. Then it struck him with the force of a hammer. The test confirmed his deepest fear. Neither Archie nor Lilibet carried his DNA. They were not his biological children. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes, the room spinning around him. He felt as though the ground had opened beneath him, pulling him into a chasm of betrayal and despair. The world he had built, the sacrifices he had made, the identity he had embraced as a father, all of it shattered in an instant. The emotional collapse was immediate. Harry dropped the paper, his body shaking as sobs racked him. Every moment he had cherished as a father flashed through his mind. Archie's first smile, Lilibet's first steps, the joy of hearing them call him daddy. Now, each memory felt poisoned, each one tainted by the revelation that they were built on a lie. The children he loved more than life itself were not his by blood. The woman he had defended against the world had concealed the truth from him from the very beginning. The betrayal was absolute, the kind that severs not only trust but the very fabric of identity. Who was he now, if not the father of his children? What was his marriage, if not a web of deception? What was his life, if everything he believed had been false? In the hours that followed, Harry's grief turned to rage. He stormed through the house, desperate to confront Meghan, but she was gone, attending a meeting for one of her projects. Alone, he wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Had she chosen another man to father the children? Was surrogacy involved without his knowledge? Had she orchestrated everything from the beginning, calculating that Harry's loyalty and vulnerability would blind him to the truth? Or had she been driven by fear, convinced that admitting her medical struggles would cost her not only Harry's love, but her place in history? The questions burned, but the answers remained out of reach, locked behind Meghan's silence and deception. When Meghan returned, Harry confronted her with the results. The confrontation was explosive, raw with fury and heartbreak. Harry demanded the truth, his voice breaking as he asked why she had lied, why she had built their entire life on a falsehood. Meghan, cornered, lashed out. She accused him of betrayal for even taking the test, of succumbing to the same press and family pressures she had always warned him about. She insisted that he had destroyed their marriage by doubting her, by violating the sacred trust between them. But her words rang hollow. The paper in his hand was undeniable. Her deflections, her anger, her tears, all of it seemed like yet another performance to Harry. For the first time, he saw not his wife, but the architect of the lie that had consumed his life. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Their home, once a sanctuary, became a battlefield. Every conversation turned into an argument, every silence thick with suspicion. Harry withdrew from Meghan emotionally, retreating into himself, struggling to reconcile his love for the children with the truth that they were not his. Meghan, furious at being exposed, doubled down on her defenses, painting herself as the victim of his mistrust. The marriage, once defined by unity against the world, now fractured under the weight of betrayal. The man who had given up everything, his family, his country, his role, now realized he had given it all for a lie. But the pain did not end at home. The palace soon became aware of the results. Though Harry had tried to keep the test secret, leaks were inevitable. The monarchy, ever attuned to scandal, moved quickly to contain the damage. Advisors whispered about the implications for succession. William confronted Harry again, this time not with warnings, but with grim validation. Charles, pragmatic as ever, saw the crisis not only as a personal tragedy, but as a threat to the stability of the crown. The monarchy had survived divorces, affairs, and even abdication, but the revelation that a prince's children were not his biological heirs threatened to ignite a scandal of unprecedented proportions. Harry found himself trapped between two worlds: the public one, where he was expected to continue playing the role of husband and father, and the private one, where his trust, his love, and his identity had been annihilated. The children remained innocent, unaware of the storm raging around them. Harry loved them still, perhaps even more fiercely, because they were blameless in a deception they had never asked for. But the bond between father and child had been poisoned by doubt, transformed by truth into something unrecognizable. He held them with tears in his eyes, torn between devotion and devastation. This chapter closes with Harry alone once more, sitting in the darkness, the DNA results spread out before him like a death sentence. His marriage is in tatters, his faith in Meghan obliterated, his identity as a father shattered. The truth he sought has destroyed the life he built, leaving him broken and uncertain of what comes next. The DNA test, once a symbol of clarity, has become a curse, a document that transformed his fairy tale into a nightmare. And as the night deepens, Harry realizes that the storm has only just begun. The fallout from this revelation will not remain within the walls of his home. It will consume Meghan, the children, the monarchy, and himself. The truth, once uncovered, cannot be contained, and its consequences will change everything forever.